Today's episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
Hello and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher Podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow, a mom of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. And this podcast was created for you so that you can connect to the information and inspiration each and every week to feel supported as you navigate these sometimes very tricky jungles of not only being a yoga teacher, but also being an entrepreneur. If you are listening to today's episode in real time and you are from the US, I just want to wish you a happy and healthy Thanksgiving week. I know that in the US, Thanksgiving seems to be a bit of a longer celebration and a bigger celebration than it is here in Canada. In Canada, our Thanksgiving is over. It was over in October, and there's nothing to stop us from putting Christmas decorations up well before your Thanksgiving. It's snowy and cold as I record here right now, and I just want to give a shout out to all of you who are listening. I know this has been a really challenging year in so many ways, and I hope that as we tune in and hang out together, it brings some comfort. I am so excited about today's episode. I know that we can all agree as yoga teachers that we really want our yoga classes to be safe places for everybody. And I've shared some different perspectives here on the podcast about how we can do that. We've had different guests on. We talked about accessible yoga and language way back in episode 92 with Elliot Kessie, formerly Kessie Hodge, Chantel Eller, and Katie Juleson. And we also talked about it in episode 138 with Jeevana Heyman, and about inclusive language for prenatal yoga back in episode 108. Yanni Fung was on the podcast in episode 146, and we talked about inclusive and safe practices in yoga. And more recently, in light of everything that happened with the Black Lives Matter movement and issues of creating a safe space for different people, I spoke with Jaisal Parikh, Chara Carruthers and Maria Kirsten, and Michelle Johnson about racism, anti-racism, and social justice on episodes 189, 173, and in a special bonus episode. All of the links to all of these episodes are in the show notes. And if you're ever wondering where that is, you just need to know the number of this episode. And you can also always search on our website. So if you go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, this one lives at theconnectedyogateacher.com/195. But you could also search for anything. Look for the little search magnifying glass at the top, and it will take you to all kinds of resources. You could type in there anti-racism, and it will pull any resources that we have there on our website. In today's episode, I wanted to bring on an expert to talk about another group of marginalized people and how we can bring awareness to them in our yoga spaces. The LGBTQ community has historically been persecuted and has experienced violence at the provincial or state, depending on where you live, national, institutional, and personal levels, which makes it all the more important for us to create and maintain a safe and inclusive space for them in our yoga classes. Today on the podcast, Tristan Katz joins me to give us a better understanding of the LGBTQ community. They give us a breakdown of common terms, cues, and language, what we as yoga teachers can do to be more aware and inclusive in our yoga classes, and what to do if and when we mess up, which is something that will inevitably happen. It happens to all of us. It's happened to me many times in my cues in my yoga classes. Also in the trainings that I lead and here on the podcast. We're all working on our language. We're all learning together. And so I am really excited that we get to dive in. Also, there's a special bonus in our show notes. So over at theconnectedyogateacher.com/195, Tristan has compiled an article with more resources, really specifically for yoga teachers. It's called LGBTQ Equity Inclusion, Actionable Steps for Yoga Teachers. This is an amazing list, and it's a great summary of what we go over today in the podcast.
what are the first steps that one can take to signify that they're trying to create more inclusive spaces for trans and non-binary folks? And to me, those action steps are really simple and easy to do, and they carry a lot of meaning. So taking just a minute to put your pronouns in your Instagram bio or your social media bios in general, putting your pronouns in your email signature, putting your pronouns on the bio page of your website, and putting your pronouns in your Zoom name, to me, are like the few steps that you can take to start to show that you are aware that trans and non-binary folks have been pushed out, have been invisibilized, have not been considered and welcomed in all spaces, and including yoga spaces, and to signify that you're doing your part to show up for trans and non-binary folks in this war.
I want to say some thank yous. First of all, thank you to all of you who have sent in questions about this exact topic. Those of you who have asked, how do I cue people in my yoga class when I know that I have transgender folks coming in, non-binary? How do I take the gender out of my language? I just want to say hats off to you for having these questions, for sending them in. This is why today's episode is here for you. Also, thank you so much to our sponsor, Schedulicity. If you don't yet know about Schedulicity, it is a scheduling software and a team of amazing people based out of Bozeman, Montana. And this team of people have really created a community there that is supporting our yoga teachers with their scheduling software. Let's have a listen to the hot tip of the week from the team over at Schedulicity.
Hello, Connected Yoga teachers. This is Matt with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. One way to make your yoga practice more accessible is to empower potential new students with information and inspiration before they walk through the door. By describing your classes and workshops on Schedulicity, students can educate themselves before choosing the type of yoga instruction that's right for them. They can sign up for a class instantly while their curiosity is piqued and know that a spot will be waiting for them. What better way to start a new yoga journey than by feeling welcomed and included before the class even begins?
I also want to give a thanks and shout out to Linda Caldwell, who left a comment about one of the recent podcast episodes, and we've gotten a lot of comments about this episode. It was podcast 178. In that episode, Devin Pelto talked about being tired of social media, and here's what Linda said in response to this. I just finished listening to podcast 178, and all I can say is wow. It was exactly what I was thinking about regarding social media. My demographic that I teach to is all about the in-person experience. Not a fan of social media, but do respond very quickly to emails. So I wanted to thank Shannon for sharing this episode, as I will be rethinking my delivery. Funny, another yoga master teacher I follow said the same thing, that many people are pulling away from social media for that reason. The comparing, the constant scrolling, and the stress. Social media has its purpose for sure. I'm so glad that I connected back with this group and look forward to the connections. My goal this week is to start reviewing the free materials on doing an online Zoom class. I have the website, the workshops, but need direction. Thanks for letting me share my thoughts during this stressful time for yoga teachers. I only teach part-time, but it is still a business that needs some new attention. Feeling blessed. Thank you so much, Linda, for sharing this inside of our Connected Yoga Teacher group and for giving me permission to share this. I love it when you hear a podcast episode and it really resonates with the way that you have been feeling, and it makes you take a look and a little bit of a review on what your next steps forward might be. Connected Yoga teachers, as we get close to kind of the holiday season, the end of this year, we're getting close to episode 200 very soon. It means so much if you ever want to share a gift of thanks. A review in either iTunes or on our Facebook page is really the best way to do that. And if you're wondering, how do I do that? Not to worry, it's so easy. If you go to any podcast page, so if you go to the connectedyogateacher.com/195 for this episode, you can click on leave a review. There's a button right there on that page. You can also leave a comment down below, or you can head on over to our Facebook page and leave a review there. I love to read them here on the podcast, especially when you call out an episode and how it helped you. I love those ones. So feel free to leave us a review and you might even get to hear your name on the podcast. Alrighty, let's get into this episode today and meet Tristan. Tristan Katz is a business and marketing coach, consultant, web and graphic designer based in Portland, Oregon. They serve a wide range of clients in the wellness industry, including yoga teachers, healing arts practitioners, and other prominent change makers. They are driven by the desire to connect with others, to support their business growth, and to help them show up more fully, authentically, and easefully in their work. Part of Tristan's intention for their work is to support teachers, practitioners, studios, and spiritual communities seeking to facilitate safer, braver spaces. To this end, Tristan is currently studying with experts in the field to expand their equity, inclusion, facilitation, and education offerings, in addition to teaching workshops and trainings centered around queer identity and LGBTQ plus awareness with an anti-oppression and intersectional lens. I cannot wait for you to hear this interview with Tristan. I feel like I got to ask so many questions, and I felt like it was exactly that, a really safe space to answer some questions. And it just really boosted my confidence as I think about the cues and the language that I use going forward. Welcome, Tristan, to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I am so excited that you're here today.
Thank you, Shannon. I'm looking forward to speaking with you and happy to be here.
I read your article. Actually, I think I was following your work a while ago, and then I saw your website because we were talking with Michelle Johnson on the podcast, and you're affiliated with her and helping her with her work. And I just have to say, I love this article that you wrote. Let me grab the title here, LGBTQ Awareness for Yoga Teachers. And I was like, oh my gosh, we need to talk about this on the podcast. Before we dig into that, tell us, where did your yoga journey begin and how did it lead you to the work that you do now?
Yeah, I always love going back in time to talk about how I got started. I was 20, so it was almost 20 years ago now when I first started practicing yoga. I started with Bikram in college, and I had never been physically active in my life. I was a couch potato through and through up until I was about 18, 20, and found my way into a Bikram class through a friend and was pretty hooked. I just felt like that clear mind, center groundedness, immediately. And I had never felt that way before. And so I just kept going. And eventually throughout my undergraduate studies, and then after I graduated, I moved to just hot flow, quote unquote, and slowly then found my way very, very slowly. It wasn't until graduate school actually that I found my way into a room temperature class and made the shift to understanding over time that yoga wasn't just about the physical practice. It took a while because not everybody is talking about that in yoga studio spaces. And I knew I always wanted to do teacher training because I'm just a forever student of things that I am passionate about. And I moved to Portland, Oregon in 2012 or so, and started looking for teacher trainings at that time and found one that was really oriented towards, though I'll say at the time they claimed to be oriented towards yoga and social justice. And I now understand that conversation was fairly limited, though it was a good starting point for the conversation.
Yeah.
So I immersed myself in actually 2 different teacher trainings in 1 year and, just went all in and started teaching. And I taught in hospital settings and recovery centers, and really was getting into the outreach work, and just started to find that the experience I was having was very teacher focused. I would take a yoga class, but my mind was picking apart the sequence or the language, and I wasn't actually in my body feeling the benefits of the practice. And I was having that so many times where I was just in the the left side of my brain, and really studying the teacher rather than feeling the yoga. And so as I watched this continuing to happen, realizing that I was really missing something, I quit teaching. I was just like, I need to stop completely. I need to go back to why I started this in the first place, which was for the benefits I was having at the time. I had struggled with disordered eating and body image issues, and yoga was really helping me heal and reorient towards myself and what it's like to be in a body. And I needed to get back to that. So it was a few years ago that I quit teaching and returned to being a student, which was like a breath of fresh air. I started going to immersions and retreats, and it was just like I found the joy and the magic again. And around that same time, I was making a professional pivot in my work and needed to find a new career path. And I had all these years of event coordination and website management and graphic design. And I just thought, oh, maybe I can support yoga teachers with these skills. And so I started reaching out to some friends in the Portland yoga community and helping with retreats and websites and things of that nature. And then I met Michelle, and working with her and collaborating with her and watching her work grow has just been like such a gift and an honor. And through all of this and studying with her as well, and really learning more about marginalization and oppression and racism and how it's showing up in yoga spaces, just because it also shows up outside of yoga spaces and what we bring in our bodies and in our minds. You can't separate the two. And as a queer person, I was feeling more and more invisibilized myself in those yoga spaces. And so through my work and studies with Michelle and through my own ongoing exploration of my own queer identity, I started just naturally having more and more conversations with the people I was working with around how we can be more sensitive to LGBTQ folks in what is predominantly very cis, straight dominated. And we can talk about the language if you want to unpack that, but has been historically dominated spaces, that are very cis and straight and or at least appearing that way. And so I just kind of naturally found my way into facilitating equity inclusion conversations for yoga teachers, and now helping studios with their teacher training programs, and really just kind of growing it, naturally and organically. So yeah, that's the kind of the winding path and the road that I found to get here. Yeah.
That's amazing. I love how you said that, because I experienced this as well. I really resonate with this. When you're really studying yoga as a teacher, it's so easy to get out of the student mind. And we talked about it, way back. I think it was the very first episode of the podcast. We talked about this. And this has happened to me over the years, on and off, often as a teacher, is it's hard to be that student. And I also just really appreciate that you felt this walking into yoga spaces. And I know that our yoga teachers listening are thinking, well, I want to have a space that feels safe for anyone. Obviously, that's yoga teachers are like, they're looking to create inclusive spaces. And yet you weren't feeling that. And you said that it's showing up. And I think being aware that it is there is one of the things I'd love to dig into. So show me how that might show up, and if it's good to start with the language discussion.
Yeah, first, let me just define the terms that I've already used. Cis is a Latin term that means same, and we now use it to describe a gender, cisgender, meaning that you're the same gender identity as the sex that you were assigned at birth, sex being based on genitalia, chromosomes, hormones, things of that nature. So cisgender, if you're a woman, you were assigned female at birth, and you're cis, you identify as a woman, you're a cis woman. I use the word straight. We could also use heterosexual for someone who, in terms of their sexual orientation, is dating opposite sex people, right? So cishet or cis straight. Those are some of the phrases, and the way it was showing up for me at the time that I started really like cluing in to what I was experiencing. I mean, I was always the student in like the back corner. Like I will come in, I will set up my mat in the back corner. I am not here to socialize. Like I was very like inward and just wanted to have my practice. And I would smile and say hi to the front desk person who knew my name. But in general, I was like kind of hiding myself. And part of that was definitely related to my life experience and the things I've internalized around my appearance and the way people perceive me. And I've just, I grew up in Los Angeles. Like there's a whole history to the stories that I was told about my worth as a human being, as someone who was assigned female at birth, and the fear that I've carried in my body as a result of how I'm being perceived or assessed or judged based on my appearances. And it's a lot of that really impacted me in ways that made me kind of get small and isolate. And so that was one of the things I was carrying into the spaces at the time. On top of that, I often have felt like just because I'm not in conversation with people and because you can't we all make assumptions based on appearances, but we can't know the truth of somebody's life experience or identity based on appearances. But I was certainly walking into a lot of yoga spaces feeling like, wow, I'm the one queer person. And at the time, that queerness was rooted in my sexual orientation. And over the last couple of years, I've also come to understand that I identify as non-binary. And so I like to say that I'm doubly queer. I'm queer in terms of my sexual orientation and my gender identity. So I was moving through those spaces feeling like, wow, I don't see myself reflected in other people. The flirting that I was seeing going on was like very straight oriented, very heterosexual. I didn't really see other people who were appearing to be trans or non-binary. And I just felt like I would see these women who I just didn't identify with. And I was making these assumptions based on what I was seeing. And on top of that, I wasn't hearing anything about pronoun considerations. Like nobody was saying like, well, hi, I'm so-and-so, these are my pronouns. Or I'd like Tristan to demo this next pose. Tristan, could you tell me your pronouns before we explore this demonstration? There was none of that conversation going on. And these things are becoming more common in our culture, I think, and still they require a lot of practice. And I think for folks who are cis, it's not common. It's not easy. It can be really kind of unfamiliar and uncomfortable, as practicing anything new is, So I recognize that, but I wasn't seeing these tools being used to create more inclusive environments. And then on top of that, I mean, I remember going to yoga classes in Los Angeles where teachers would say, okay, ladies, I know you want a bikini body in time for summer, like time to get the ab work on, or, and so I was hearing that stuff too, this assumption that the people who were female presenting, let's just say, identified as ladies, and that we could just all lump all the ladies in the room into caring about our bikini body,
Right.
So, there's this
Right.
like level of toxicity that's in dominant culture that we often can bring into this yoga space unconsciously or consciously. And I was taking it in, and I was feeling like, okay, as I start to work with yoga teachers, where can I start to make a shift? What kind of change can I encourage here? And the first conversation I started having with some of my clients was like, hey, I'm coming to your retreats, I'm coming to your workshops. When you start these small group settings, when we all go around and introduce ourselves and say our names and what our favorite pose is, or why we're here, or what we're looking to get out of the immersion or the retreat or the workshop, could we also say our pronouns? Like, even if everyone in the room says he, her, like if everybody's saying their pronouns and they're aligned with what we're assuming about their identities, like, can we still do that practice so that when somebody comes into the room who is trans or non-binary, we're already set up to make them feel included, and we're not going to further stigmatize them.
That is so amazing and so easy to do. But like you said, it requires practice. I want to dig into a few things that you said. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story. I feel like when someone shares a story, it really allows us. Obviously, we can't know exactly what that feels like until we're in those shoes. Like everyone has their own way that we're walking in the world, and we can never understand someone else. But hearing a story like that helps us to see, oh, right. Right. Those things, like, of course, being called out, hey, ladies, get your beach body on. Like, that makes me feel uncomfortable as a cis hetero woman. Like, I feel like I would be really uncomfortable in that class as well. But it brings it to a whole new level. So the other thing that you said was the pronouns. And I want to call a question in here that I've heard over and over again. I've heard yoga teachers say, you know what? Like, I live in this tiny community, and I can appreciate that. There's 400 people in my town. And if I started a yoga class and I was like, hey, everyone, I'm Shannon, and my pronouns are she and her, I think it would elicit some discomfort from my yoga students who live in my area. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
And I hear that from yoga teachers. So do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I think, when we're witnessing others' discomfort around that conversation, it's an opportunity for us to model and educate and inform, which means that we ourselves have to be seeking that information so that we can then speak from our own voice, from our own language and words on behalf of that conversation. So, do some reading, do some research, read my resources on my website or my Instagram. I'm constantly speaking to this, but really to me, people are going to be uncomfortable. Part of the practice and tools of yoga is teaching us to be in that discomfort. Like that's where the growth edge is, right? That's where the learning is. So can we take the embodied practice of that exploring discomfort on the mat? And, I want to note like discomfort differs from pain, right? So we'll just say that. But can we take that embodied practice of exploring discomfort and apply it to this moment where we ourselves might be feeling discomfort in saying our pronouns to a group of people, or we're sensing discomfort in the room? And can we hold it with that, compassion, with awareness, with curiosity, and just be present to it and help to, in that moment, educate and inform? So if I were, in your shoes and I was walking into a smaller community and a group of students who I'm assuming some might be uncomfortable or unfamiliar with the practice of stating pronouns, I would say something like, hi, my name is Tristan. I use they, them pronouns. So in this case, I'll say my pronouns are they and them. And the reason that I say my pronouns is because I want to normalize pronoun consideration and sensitivity, because our culture is really set up in a way in which pronouns are assumed, gender identity is assumed based on appearances, and really the conversation around gender identity and pronouns is much more nuanced and complex. And I'm trying to create an inclusive space where everyone can hopefully feel safer in their bodies. And to me, part of that is stating from the beginning that what my pronouns are, so that I'm signaling to people that I want to welcome people who identify with any pronouns. I want to welcome people of any gender identity, so that, when we don't say our pronouns and someone who identifies as trans or non-binary is in the room, they might get triggered by me not saying my pronouns. They might feel further marginalized, further invisibilized, further othered, right? Because they're moving through the world outside of the yoga space, constantly experiencing the harm that comes from marginalization and oppression. And when they come into my yoga space, I want them to feel welcomed. I want them to feel seen. I want them to feel as safe as I hope that I can possibly allow them to be, to explore the practice in their mind and in their body and spirit. And the best way for me to do that is to say my name, say my pronouns, and if it feels appropriate, to offer a little bit about why I'm doing that and the significance of being sensitive to the fact that we can't make assumptions about people's identity based on how they appear. Gender is it's a much more nuanced conversation than we've all been taught, right? We've all been taught that gender is binary. You're either man or you're a woman, and it's assigned at birth, and that's all there is to it. But I think we're all coming to understand that this isn't new. Trans identity is not a new phenomenon that just emerged out of nowhere. It has a long history. It predates the gender binary. The gender binary is a relatively contemporary, like hundreds and hundreds of years, of course, but it's a construct that was made at a time when we were trying to put people in boxes and set up a caste system ultimately, right? Which is how patriarchy, where patriarchy fits in, I should say. And so acknowledging that this construct of gender and the norms that we've all internalized are actually not true. And the more we perpetuate that culture in which everybody is either he or her based on how they appear or how they were born and assigned at birth, the more we perpetuate that, the more we're causing harm, the more we're furthering that marginalization, and the more we're excluding people from the spaces that we're creating to explore the practice of yoga.
That is so good. Thank you for really highlighting, because I know our yoga teachers don't want to make people feel like that. And I love how you brought in the discomfort and that uncomfortableness. We have a lot of conversations with our yoga students that are uncomfortable. Like for me to stand up and say, you know what, I taught you all this time, like keep your knee in line with your ankle, and I was wrong. Like we've all been doing that because of how I learned, and now I want to tell you. I feel like it's the same thing, like it's something that we were taught. It's so ingrained in us and in our society. And a lot of us as yoga teachers, I think, have been in this privilege of this cisgender. Like we're privileged. We have just been showing up and the world is like fits us very well. And it takes some bravery to step out of that. So I really appreciate that you brought that in. It's making me think about the podcast, because I don't start the podcast asking pronouns. I ask it on my intake form, and I just actually learned to take off preferred pronouns. That is also, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. Yeah. That's something I was engaging in that conversation around the same time that I started working with teachers to normalize the conversation around pronouns. I was saying to them, when you do say, I'd like you to say your name and your pronouns and why you're here. I was saying at the time, can you avoid say your preferred pronouns? And the reason we want to avoid that phrase is because the word preference implies that I'm preferring one set of pronouns or one identity signifier over another. And in my experience, and from what I know of other trans and non-binary folks, it's not a preference. I don't prefer to be called Tristan. My name is Tristan, right?
Right.
And I don't prefer they, them pronouns. Those are the pronouns that feel best for me. It's not a preference. It's not a choice. It just is. Gender is a felt sense, it's an internal sense of who you are. And, I also want to acknowledge that it's a construct, but it is a felt sense. It's an internal experience. And no one can tell me what my internal experience is other than me. I'm the person who knows that best. And what I know from experimenting with pronouns is that they, them feels so much better for me and my body than any other set of pronouns. So it's not about me preferring something. It's about my own inner felt sense of who I am and how I want to be called in the world and referred to in the world.
That makes so much sense, especially when you say, like, is that your preferred name? I would feel really weird if someone was like, and if someone said to me, oh, your pronouns are she and her, that's what you prefer. I'd be like, no.
Right. like so for Shannon, who identifies as a cis woman, like, would you prefer she, her? Or would you prefer he, him? You know what I mean? Like, and if you felt more aligned with he, him, good for you. Let's go there. You know what I mean? But that's not a matter of preference. It's a matter of your own internal felt sense of how you feel when someone refers to you.
Right. This is so good. Okay. Another question I have, and it just came up. I was at a workshop and someone's pronouns, because I love on Zoom how now we can have everybody's pronouns, was she and they.
And they. Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, I don't know what's happening now. I would have assumed it was she and her or they, them.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm so grateful for your willingness to ask, because I'm seeing more and more folks experiment with that. And I did as well for a period of time as I was kind of finding my way through exploring my gender. And to me, claiming she and they means that this person is comfortable hearing both or either, being referred to as she or they. And to me, our work then is to use both, is to put both into practice so that we're fully seeing the whole of this person and how they want to be called in the world. And I try myself to just challenge my mind in relationships like that, where someone is using both pronouns, to use the one that is probably less likely to be used on a regular basis. So for folks who claim she and they, I often gravitate towards calling that person by they, them, just so that I can affirm them, because I'm assuming that when they move through the world, that part of their identity is probably not being affirmed as much as the she, her part of their identity. And I just want to say, like, these things are not, queer identity is not a monolith, so I can't speak in like black and white frameworks around it. But I will say that for someone who's experimenting with both pronouns or claiming both pronouns, they're likely finding their way through a gender identity exploration. They're trying to feel which pronoun feels best to them in their body. In my experience, let me just speak from the I. I claimed she and they for a time because I wanted to hear what it felt like to hear both. I wanted to hear what it felt like to hear they, them for me. I wanted to hear what it felt like to hear she, her, so that I could make the choice based on, it was like an experiment. It was like a science lab, and I was just moving through the world trying to hear both so I could tell which one felt better on any given day, any given moment. It's possible that I could have stuck using both, because maybe they both did feel good for me. Over time, I came to understand that I would much rather hear they, them, that they, them actually feels so much better in my body. And so then I shifted to they, them. But my point is, it could be a reflection of a process. It could be a reflection of feeling that both are comfortable. And our work in hearing and receiving that is to put both into practice. And I've also seen a lot of folks say they/she, which to me means they want to hear they more than she. You know what I'm saying? Like there's so many different signifiers. The conversation is so complex. There's no way to know for sure what somebody's internal felt sense or experience is, but we're trying to send these messages to one another about what we might be feeling, what we might be exploring, and can you see and hold space for that exploration, or for that quote unquote unusual, quote unquote countercultural way of feeling through identity and experiencing identity, so that we can hopefully normalize it and make it less, quote unquote, countercultural, because
Right.
The reality is that it's the countercultural thought or perspective is rooted in transphobia. It's rooted in heterosexism, cis heterosexism. So let's challenge that narrative and push back against it by accommodating and holding space and respecting for how someone shows up and who they claim to be.
This is so amazing. You've also really clarified that I would be fine saying she, her, they, them, because I was also thinking, is it only those two pronouns on the screen? So that's, it feels like a silly question now, but it's like really, and I appreciate that you said try and use both. And the speaker who introduced this person at the workshop did use both. And I was just trying to soak it in, like, how would I do this? So that's the other thing. Like, we are, we've grown up in this world. I feel like my kids are better at this than me. Mm-hmm. They've told me, Mom, no, you shouldn't have said he in that grocery store. Like, you can't make assumptions of people's gender identity. And I was like, right. And I also want to call in something, like, everyone harps on the grammar part of they and them, which has been disproven. This is not a thing. We can say they and them.
Yeah, we actually do. Like, we use they, them pronouns for people we don't know all the time. Like, if somebody leaves their wallet, their yoga mat, we say, oh, look, somebody left their wallet, somebody left their yoga mat. I hope they come back for it. I hope they remember. We don't know who the person is, and we're using a singular they pronoun. So we're doing it. We're just not doing it consciously. We're not aware that we're already using a singular they. So I say that to then say, plus the dictionary has officially recognized that they, them can be used as a singular pronoun. But I really want to highlight the fact that argument about grammar is still rooted in transphobia, right? And so I understand where it's coming from, because our brains are all hardwired still to
It's not coming from us all being worried about our grammar.
No, it's coming from the hardwiring of our brains, and people are claiming grammar as the reason or the excuse. But like right. The people who I talk to are claiming that, like, are they really dedicated to grammar? No, So yeah, that's
figure
why
out your there, and there first, and then
right. Yeah, then we'll talk.
In the right spot.
Good for you. I love that, Shannon. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the language that I have heard in yoga classes is like, okay, bring that block towards your bra line. And I've said that. And I know that there are people in my class that are not wearing a bra, and I've tripped over my words in that moment. And I lead a lot of pelvic health yoga classes. And I know I've said, here's a female pelvis. And I bring out my pelvic model. And I'm really looking at my own words that I'm using. Can you talk about some of the language that you have heard in yoga classes, or how you help yoga teachers navigate this?
Yeah, it usually means using more words. So I'll just say that than we're used to or than we're inclined to. The example I love to give is I was on retreat once, right around the time that I was starting to kind of inwardly question my gender identity. And I heard one of the teachers say, bodies with breasts might have this experience in the shape. And I was like, boom, there we go. Like, I feel included. I feel seen. The teacher didn't know that I was like questioning my gender identity, or that anyone in the room might be questioning their gender identity. But the very fact that they said bodies with breasts and they didn't gender it made me feel safer, made me feel more included, more welcome. So not gendering things, like really abstracting. And by the way, the other thing I want to say about the bodies with breasts comment is, like, not all women have breasts, right? For all kinds of reasons. Breast cancer is one of them. Like, we can't just make these vast assumptions and generalizations. We're potentially putting people into sympathetic arousal when we do, right? Which is the opposite of what we're trying to offer in a yoga environment. So refraining from inherently gendered language. One of the things I am trying to work with folks to incorporate is using AFAB, meaning it's an acronym for assigned female at birth. So you might say, like, AFAB bodies, or those who are assigned female at birth, likely have this structure in their pelvis, or, the acknowledgement that I'm losing my thread, but the point is to not inherently gender things and to abstract as much as possible. So in the instance of put the block below your bra line, like, there are other cues that we can give, right?
In line with our armpits? With
your shoulder blades, with your armpits, it's so much easier to say bra line, but there's so many people in the class who you're not acknowledging when you do. And so, again, it might require more language, but really stepping back and thinking about other cues you can give that don't revolve around gender. Because, again, anytime you gender something, you're excluding some people in the room, you're potentially triggering other people in the room. People who are assigned female at birth have a wide variety of presentations of quote unquote female anatomy characteristics. And so do people who are assigned male at birth. And you can't predict what somebody's experience is in a shape. And so, part of this is like being aware of the way in which we gender things. And another part of this is just general accessibility and equitability in a yoga class. Does that feel like an satiating answer? Okay.
It does. It really is helpful. And it requires more work, just like everything else I learn about language.
I mean, it's trauma-informed sensitive yoga, right? I mean, acknowledging the life experience that is different in the room, being sensitive to that, being really thoughtful and intentional with your words, slowing down. This is one of the things I also love to talk to people about when it comes to using they, them pronouns. I really slow down when I'm talking about a friend who uses they, them pronouns. I get really present in my mind with how I'm referring to them, how I'm speaking about them, so that I can hopefully avoid misgendering them, right? And that requires like skill and practice and presence. Again, yoga sets us up to do this work really, really well, you know? And I just think when it comes to standing before a class as a teacher, if you're holding the sensitivity of trauma, and if you're trying to use your language thoughtfully and intentionally, it's going to require more work and more effort. And in the process, that's also probably going to put you more into your regulated nervous state too. Because it's when we start speaking really quickly and not really thinking about what we're saying, and our tone changes and our words start, slurring together, that we get really more aroused and more upregulated. So the slowing down is something that I think as yoga teachers, we're all trying to do so that we can co-regulate and offer that regulation back to our students. And to me, being more intentional with your language choices, with how do you refer to people in the room, with how you're referring to the bodies in the room, is going to help ground you and your students, not to mention make them feel potentially more seen, more welcomed, more included, and safer.
That's amazing. I love that co-regulation and talking about that. I know that you have some examples in your article. We'll make sure that we link to it in the show notes. Now, you had already mentioned AFAB. Am I saying that right?
I say AFAB. Yeah.
AFAB. Okay, we'll remember it like fabulous then.
Wonderful. I love it.
AFAB. So then is the other one assigned male at birth based on
AMAB.
genitalia? AMAB.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And this is something that I'm learning as well. And I want to ask another question, and it's kind of around pelvic health. Like a lot of the time, not even pelvic health, but a lot of the time our yoga teachers will work on finding a niche. And I see it a lot maybe I see it a lot because I'm a woman and I identify as a woman. That I see even coaches, like I work with women.
Yeah.
And I appreciate so much that they have chosen a niche and narrowed it down, but I wonder how that feels to non-binary folks.
Yeah, I just had this experience recently where I found someone's work online, a like business consultant type, and she writes on her website that she supports women, and I immediately felt like, well, are her offerings for me? Because I don't identify as a woman, and so I reached out to her and I said, hey, I'm non-binary, assigned female at birth. I really appreciate your work. I want to buy one of your courses, and I noticed that you say that your work is for women. Can you comment? Am I welcome? And she wrote back and she was like, yes, thank you. I need to update my website and it's long overdue. And I really appreciate you asking. And I would love for you to enjoy my work, and please feel free to. And thank you so much for reaching out and asking. And I think we do need to make a shift. I mean, if you want to work with women, say that. And I would encourage us to maybe say something like, I believe, the binary gender is a construct and I support everyone on the gender spectrum. My work is focused on working with cis women. Like, I would make that statement just so that you're acknowledging that the binary construct of gender is harmful and causing marginalization. It's the root of oppression for many people. So when you acknowledge that and also say that you work with cis women, you're, I think, sending a very different message with a very different tone. the point is, though, there's nothing wrong with specializing in working with cis women if that's what you want to work with. I would just be very clear in your language around that. And there's no, easy way to be like, I work with anyone who identifies as a woman. Like, you can say that, but then you really have to be prepared to hold space for a trans woman if a trans woman wants to show up and take advantage of your work or what you're offering. And so really thinking about like, who are you adept and skilled at holding space for in whatever you're doing, and making sure that you're prepared to navigate a conversation in which you have no lived experience around that person's identity, really questioning those things. But my point is that there's nothing wrong with saying I specialize in working with cis women if that's what you want to specialize in. I do think in the birthing world and in the world of pelvic health, we need more people who are wanting to work with non-binary assigned female at birth folks,
Yes.
right? And so, if you're called to do that, if that's something you want to do, if you want to practice gender affirming care, like go out there, take the trainings, not just one, take several inclusivity trainings, because there's so many available, especially right now in the pandemic. Like, there's just a ton of online inclusivity trainings out there. And I would suggest starting there and really pursuing education that's being facilitated and offered by trans and non-binary folks, so that you can cultivate the language and the sensitivity and as much awareness as you can within your privileged identities, so that you can show up for trans and non-binary folks in a meaningful way.
That's amazing. I hope that anyone listening who has a training like that, or who has taken a training that they feel good about, puts it in our comments of our show notes.
Absolutely. And yeah. I have several. I mean, I'm offering several starting in October, actually. And I am in relationship with so many different people over Instagram who are offering these kinds of programs. I mean, if you want to reach out to me and have me point you in the right direction, I'm happy to do that. I'll just give a big shout out to the Trans Yoga Project. It's a new group endeavor by a group of trans and non-binary yoga teachers who are getting together to offer trainings and resources for folks to learn how to be more inclusive in their language and in their curriculum and in their content and their approach. And they're on Instagram, they're on Patreon, and I think they're doing incredible work, and that's a great place to start.
That's amazing. We'll link to as many as you can throw at us in the show notes for sure. And so the other thing that I'm hearing is this whole idea of like, we have fought for women's rights and women are excited to identify as women and really hold on to that. And then somehow they feel like they're speaking to women. So I'm thinking of one person who I talked to really recently, and it made so much sense. She helps women who want to map their cycle and work with their fertility or just their awareness of their body. And I called it out. Like I said, I'm working on my gender language right now. I just want you to know you may hear me working through that myself, instead of saying like, but she said, well, I wouldn't identify as a person who menstruates. That doesn't feel like my identity. I identify as a woman. So I wonder if you have some thoughts on how we can bring it in so that everyone feels included and safe in that space.
Yeah. What you're talking about is tricky because it bumps up against trans exclusionary feminism. And so I just want to name that, and also name that I believe that feminists and feminism is a place for everyone, regardless of their identities. I think that fighting for women's rights is incredibly important and will continue to be for the foreseeable future. I mean, we live in a system and in a culture that is really rooted in misogyny and patriarchy, and feminism continues to be important. My belief, though, is that anyone can be a feminist, and that fighting for feminism actually also means fighting for trans women's rights. I mean, trans women are women. So to me, they deserve to be included in the feminist movement as well. Sure, their life experience at one point in their life might have been centered around a different gender identity, though they might not have felt that in their bodies. That was the way the world was perceiving them. But at this point in time, if a trans woman identifies as she, her, and feels that she wants to be included in women's rights, then she deserves to be. And just as, a male-bodied partner who's a feminist, to me, he gets to be a feminist too. Like, please, I want more people fighting for that. Absolutely. And I don't think feminism needs to exclude anyone. I think we're all impacted differently by these systems of oppression, like patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy. All of us are having different experiences within these systems, and we all need to be fighting to dismantle them because they're impacting all of us negatively. Some of us are benefiting while others are suffering. And so the point is that I often say, back to the sentence you said where you said that this particular person you were speaking to didn't want to be identified as someone who menstruates, and yeah, totally. Like who wants to be that, right?
Right.
I like to say bodies that bleed. Like that's another great way to like not gender it while also acknowledging that some of us bleed and some of us don't.
Right.
And regardless of our identities, some of us bleed and some of us don't. And some of us can have babies and some of us can't, regardless of how we identify. And so I agree. We don't need to isolate people to bodies that menstruate. And I think that we do need to include anyone who identifies as a woman in that conversation and to not recognize that trans women are women and fighting for women's rights in a similar way and also in a very different way than cis women are is doing harm. It's perpetuating harm. It's perpetuating oppression and marginalization. It's perpetuating invisibilization. It's and perpetuating all that harmful toxicity is what leads to more trans women being murdered. And
Yes.
I think we all need to be having these conversations so that we can raise awareness and cultivate greater sensitivity and understanding and compassion so that we are working towards rights for everyone and not just for one subset of people based on their gender identity, right? We all deserve to have rights. We all deserve to be acknowledged and respected for who we are. Women deserve that. Trans women deserve that. And I'm just using these two, groups of people as an example because it's relevant to feminism and women's rights.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. You, at the beginning of this article that you had, you called attention to how we need to deconstruct this and that it's really all of it's tied together: racism, sexism, homophobia, ableism, transphobia, all of it. Like, so let's all just get on board and we're figuring that out a lot in 2020. We had the conversation, we already talked about Michelle Johnson about anti-racism, and it does really fall on all of us. So I love how you said, like, feminism is for all of us. We can, no matter how we identify. Oh, this is good.
Yeah. And I also want to say, like, again, we're all impacted by misogyny and patriarchy.
Yes.
Cis men are impacted by misogyny and patriarchy too. They are also suffering. They are benefiting from those systems and they are being negatively impacted by them in terms of the gender norms and expectations around what a quote unquote man is supposed to be. Right. And so really acknowledging that we're all carrying this toxicity in our bodies in very different ways based on our identities and our life experiences, based on the way society is structured around power and access to power. And I'm sure Michelle probably spoke about proximity to power and social location. And to me, we can't talk about women's rights without talking about Black women's rights, without talking about Black trans women's rights. Like, these are the conversations we need to be having in order to work towards true freedom, true liberation, individually and collectively. And I do think that 2020 on some level is like a pivot year, is a game changer, I hope. I mean, I think more people are having these conversations. So, I'm optimistic on some level. And I think that it's up to each of us, and yoga teachers especially. We're trying to provide spaces for people people to get well. And our wellness is interconnected and tied. And we can't get well as cis white people, while other people without those identities aren't having the same access to that wellness.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is so good. This providing this safe space, it brings me back years ago. I wasn't even a teenager yet, I don't think. And my grandparents they were foster parents for years. And one of the foster children that came to stay with them had been kicked out of his home and wanted to be called Michael instead of, I can't remember, and wanted to identify as he and him. And my grandparents were like, that is fine. That doesn't matter. Sure, we'll call you whatever you want. And they just created this safe space. And I know that's what our yoga teachers want to do. I know that that's the main goal, is that people can like walk in the door and then everything kind of falls away. So I think this is such a good conversation, and I'd love to continue it, in our comments, in our Facebook group, of ways that we're doing it. I know I want to do it. I went through when I had a prenatal yoga teacher training, I went through the whole manual and made it gender neutral.
I love that.
I know it's possible. Like, especially for pregnancy, I was like,
yes,
everywhere.
So important.
Yeah. And I remember the conversations then I had with my dad, who did not grow up in a generation of thinking that someone who identifies as a man can have a baby.
Right.
And my dad is really, he was raised by those grandparents who are like, sure,
right.
Go on. Like, however you identify. And we had a lot of conversations about it. And I think that that's also our job as yoga teachers, to be having those conversations in our small communities. So I'm excited to see where this goes. I really want to thank you for explaining so many things. I had so many questions for you today, and also for writing this article and doing the work that you do. I see that you also, I just want to, or maybe you can tell us, you also do like copywriting and...
Yeah, I didn't start in the work of equity inclusion. I started in admin work and brand identity work and website and graphic design. And so I am currently calling that digital strategist work. But I support yoga teachers with marketing, with graphic and web work, with how to create a consistent promotional plan, and I help with copy. I help with, really almost anything that you could come up with that you might need as a yoga teacher. If you need help coming up with how to structure a retreat, I will have all those kind of collaborative, creative explorations. I hold the space, I provide the container, I provide the coaching and the consulting that's needed. And then I provide the more hands-on logistical support of getting the website launched, of creating the graphics, and helping you take up space from a business standpoint, right? So that's the kind of other half of my work. And I'll help with event coordination and things of that nature. And the equity inclusion work is kind of just come into the play organically and naturally based on my interests and my own lived experience as a queer person.
That's amazing. I want our yoga teachers to go and check out your website. It is amazing. I was even just looking at the About page and how you've worded things. I'm really impressed by it. And so I know that they can learn a lot just by going and checking out your website and this article for sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for answering our questions today and sharing so much today. And thanks for being here.
Thank you, Shannon. I really appreciate you inviting me on and wanting to have this conversation.
Alrighty, connected yoga teachers, I want to hear from you. What were some of your key takeaways here? What did you learn? Thank you again, Tristan, for your time and just answering so many questions. I had so many questions for you, and I feel like you gave me a lot to think about and some really concrete answers. So thank you for that. Again, connected yoga teachers, I want to remind you that Tristan has created this amazing resource for you. I'm so excited that you have this freebie to access. We'll make sure to link to it in the show notes. Again, it's called LGBTQ Equity Inclusion, Actionable Steps for Yoga Teachers. Tristan, thank you so much for creating this. I feel like I said near the end of the interview, sometimes what we need is this checklist. And you were just like, I'm on it. I'm creating it. So thank you so much for doing that. I wanted to share, Connected Yoga Teachers, that one of my key takeaways after this interview was to practice. So Tristan gave me this place to practice in my intro, outro with using pronouns they and them. And it's becoming more comfortable for me. It's becoming, definitely there's a conscious decision. And I find myself actually going back and checking our podcast forms more just to make sure, does this person use the pronouns that I was guessing at before? And even catching myself at guessing pronouns and instead checking on the pronouns first. So that was exciting. And I want to just say it was uncomfortable at first, or it took my brain another moment to think about things, which can feel like discomfort to me anyway. Another key takeaway here was just looking back at the article that first spurred this conversation with Tristan, and I'll make sure that we link to it in the show notes. And one huge part there was like on when you mess up. Tristan talks about naming and owning responsibility for the mistake. Don't make a big deal of it. Do not center yourself in this. If requested, apologize genuinely. And as you move forward, choose different actions. And there's a lot more detail in the article. I think it's laid out so well. Thank you so much for this, Tristan. And I would say go and read it for sure. Another thing that I've really been looking at is my own teacher trainings. So the teacher trainings that I lead in Yoga for Pelvic Health, how to update the language there, the work that we do over at Pelvic Health Professionals as well. We had an amazing training in there with Tobias Wiggins, who did a 2-hour transgender competency training. You can actually get access right now. I'll make sure to link in the show notes to our Pelvic Health Professionals membership site. These are the conversations that I wasn't seeing before as a yoga teacher who specialized in the world of pelvic health. And now that I am seeing them a little bit, it's like, how was I missing that? So if you are in that same boat, hey, we're there together. We're all on this journey of learning and making new language choices. And if this is overwhelming for you, know that it has been many times for me. I feel like my children are better at this than I am, that my children really help me and teach me in this journey. And there are also people in my life, my children are definitely at the age that they're at, where they're not afraid to call me out on things like this. And so if someone has, called you out or gently said to you, consider this with this language, know that that person is feeling safe enough and close enough to you in your life to bring this up. And chances are that this episode is also reaching out to some people who have not felt safe to address this with a yoga teacher or a yoga teacher training or a yoga school. And so this is a great resource to send that person or that school or that organization. I'm curious to know your questions. You can send them in an email, or you can also post them in the comment section below the show notes. Also, inside of our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group is a great place to have more discussion about this. If you are wondering how we can work together further, one, I'm not going very far these days like many other people. We're not traveling far at all. I'm working from home. The best way to connect and work with me right now is over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. If you're interested in anything about how pelvic health ties into your yoga classes, or if you want to connect more about the podcast, we have a voicemail button on our homepage over at theconnectedyogateacher.com. And also, you can click on the contact to send us an email. Alrighty, Connected Yoga Teachers, you know the drill here. First of all, I want to say thank you to our team, Suzanne, Crunch, Nick, and Sinead. Thank you so, so much for all that you do. Thank you also to you, dear listener. You make this possible. When you tune in and hang out and we get to learn together, it really is such an honor that you spend the time here. And I want to hear from you. What will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.